I had always thought of myself as an ordinary child, living in an ordinary family. I wasn't spoiled, but I wasn't treated unfairly either. At least, not before everything changed. Before my sister was born. That night I was jolted awake by frantic knocking on my door and Aunt Claire's panicked voice. I still remember her pale face as she said, "Ivy, you need to pack your things. Your mom is in the hospital." In my mind, hospitals meant accidents, pain, and all the terrible things children never want to think about. But the real horror wasn't the accident or even loss, it was what happened afterward. Rachel, my sister, was born nearly 2 months premature. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I understood it was serious because suddenly, everyone in the house focused entirely on that baby. The weeks that followed were a blur of long days spent at Aunt Claire's house, overhearing hushed conversations about Rachel's condition. I wasn't allowed to visit the hospital often. Only a few brief meetings with my mother, and each time she would only say one thing. "Be good, Ivy, Mommy is very busy." And so I learned how to become invisible. When Rachel was finally brought home, things became more suffocating than ever. The house we once lived in turned into a sterile fortress, where every trace of me slowly faded away. Hand sanitizers, disinfectant wipes, and antibacterial sprays appeared everywhere, to the point that I could smell rubbing alcohol even in my sleep. My mother became obsessed with keeping Rachel safe. She scrubbed every surface at least 3 times a day, monitored the nursery temperature by the hour, and washed her hands so often that her skin cracked. But what hurt me the most wasn't the strict rules or the excessive cleanliness. It was the fact that I no longer belonged in my own family. The slightest sign of illness, a sneeze, a minor cough, would immediately send me to Grandma's house. Or worse, I'd be kicked out of the room with my mother's wary eyes watching me like I was a walking threat. At first, I thought it was a blessing. Grandma Amelia was kind and always let me help her bake. There, I didn't have to whisper every word or tiptoe around like an intruder. But eventually I realized something painful. I wasn't sent away because my mother cared about me, I was sent away because I was a risk. I tried everything to win back my parents' attention, but to them, only Rachel mattered. The first time I earned straight A's, my mother barely glanced at my test before returning to her list of Rachel's medications. When I won first place in the school science fair with a renewable energy project, my father sighed and told me to store my display board in the garage. Rachel might be allergic to the dust from the cardboard. I never knew if that was true or just another excuse for them to dismiss me. But the hardest blow came when I was 12. For months I had practiced tirelessly for the school talent show, where I would perform a piano piece I had spent a whole year learning. I had dreamed of seeing my parents' proud faces in the audience, of hearing their applause when I finished. But on the day of my performance, Rachel developed a mild fever. 99 DFE. Just a common fever that any child would experience, and just like that, my parents stayed home with Rachel, while I stood on stage in a crowded yet utterly empty auditorium. No one was there for me. 2 weeks later, Rachel had a 15-minute flute recital, playing a simple piece that any child could learn in a few days. The entire family, including both sets of grandparents, attended. They clapped, cheered, and spoke of Rachel's natural talent as if she were a musical prodigy. That was the moment I understood. Nothing I did would ever make them see me. Nothing would ever change the fact that in this family, I was nothing compared to Rachel. Rachel quickly learned how to use that to her advantage. From a young age, she knew how to manipulate every situation to get what she wanted. A little fatigue meant skipping school, a slight headache let her lounge on the couch all day, and if she complained about difficult homework, our mother would call the teacher to ask for an extension. Meanwhile, I had to handle everything on my own. Rachel only needed to whine, and someone would fix things for her. I didn't hate Rachel, I just hated how my entire world was erased to make space for her. And so, I accepted that no one would ever care about me, that no matter what I did it would never be enough. But, I also learned something. If no one would cheer for me, I would applaud myself. If no one would help me succeed, I would carve my own path. I didn't know then that one day, quietly walking away from this family would be the best thing I ever did. Grandma Amelia was perhaps the only one in the family who truly saw me. Every time I was sent to her house for a minor cough or simply because my mother didn't want to take risks with Rachel, she never treated me like an inconvenience. Instead, she pulled me into her world, a world of shimmering rings, faded gemstone necklaces, and small wooden boxes filled with mysteries. "Do you know what this is, Ivy?" she asked one afternoon as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at an antique hairpin. I shook my head. "This is a Victorian-era piece, handmade. See these engravings? No machine could create such details. And do you see this mark?" She pointed to a tiny symbol near the clasp. "That's the jeweler's hallmark. Things like this are worth more than you might think." I stared at the item in my hands, feeling its weight, the smoothness of its cool metal. That was the moment I realized some things held more value than what the eye could see. The more time I spent at Grandma's house, the more I learned about antique jewelry. I learned how to recognize real gold by its weight, how to distinguish natural pearls from synthetic ones with just a glance, how to determine the rarity of a gemstone by the way it reflected light. I was fascinated. But when I returned home, none of that mattered. I grew up in indifference. If I earned the highest score in my class, it was just expected because I had nothing else to worry about. If Rachel got a C+, it was a full family event, complete with cake and praise for her endless effort. I started to understand that I couldn't wait for someone to recognize me, I had to do it myself. I buried myself in books, not just because I loved learning but because I knew it was my only ticket out of that house. I joined every club I could, the debate team, student council, the school newspaper. I worked part-time at a small cafe to save money. When it came time for the SATs, I didn't just score high, I scored a perfect 1600, an achievement fewer than 1% of students ever reach. I remember staring at my computer screen, unable to believe my eyes. I had done it! I ran downstairs, eager to share the news with my mom. "Mom, I got a perfect SAT score." She didn't take her eyes off Rachel, who was complaining about her difficult math homework. "That's nice, Ivy," she said dismissively. "But I'm busy helping Rachel. Go clean up the house for me." Rachel smirked. "Wow, someone thinks she's special." I swallowed the lump in my throat. That was the moment I realized that no matter how far I went, in their eyes, I would always be nothing more than a shadow behind my sister. I filled out my own scholarship applications, handled my own college paperwork, and figured everything out on my own. I earned a full-ride scholarship to the University of Michigan, covering tuition, housing, and books. When I announced it at dinner, my mother just sighed. "Michigan? That's so far, Rachel's going to miss you." Rachel didn't bother hiding her grin. "Great, when you leave I'm taking your room, I need more space for my TikTok videos." On move-in day, no one in my family came with me. Aunt Claire was the one who drove me, handing me a small envelope, saying it was something Grandma had set aside for me from her pension. I hugged her, unable to speak. I made a promise to myself. I would never come back empty-handed. 4 years later I stepped into the real world with a prestigious degree, and no one in my family even knew. I landed a job at a renowned auction house in Chicago, specializing in rare antique jewelry collections. The work wasn't glamorous at first. I spent hours cataloging what seemed like worthless trinkets, old wedding rings, broken necklaces, scratched-up watches. But then one day, I came across a brooch that had been dismissed as a fake. Something didn't sit right. I picked it up, felt its weight, examined the intricate engravings. It wasn't a cheap replica. I had learned this from Grandma Amelia. Quietly, I spent 2 days researching, checking the jeweler's mark, cross-referencing archives. I wasn't wrong. This was an antique piece worth tens of thousands of dollars. I took my findings to the auction director. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I nodded and laid out all the evidence I had gathered. The brooch was relisted for auction. Its true value? $58,000. For the first time in my life, I was recognized. From then on, I was no longer just the new hire. I was given more significant pieces. Gained access to high-profile clients. I wasn't just existing. I was becoming an expert. My family still had no idea. And I liked it that way. After my first major success with the nearly $60,000 brooch, I steadily built my reputation in the world of jewelry authentication. No one saw me as just another nameless employee at the auction house anymore. My superiors assigned me to more valuable pieces. Clients trusted me. And my commissions kept growing. But there was one thing I quickly realized. Working for someone else had its limits. No matter how many six-figure or even million-dollar pieces I uncovered, I only received a fraction of the reward. I started thinking about something I had never dared to dream before: starting my own company. No one believed I could do it. Even I had my doubts at times. I withdrew all my savings, took out a small loan, and rented an old storage space on the second floor of a Chinese restaurant in a not-so-great part of Chicago. The smell of food clung to the walls, the Wi-Fi was unreliable, and every time someone ordered Kung Pao chicken, the entire room filled with the overpowering scent of chili peppers. But the most important thing was, it was mine. My first office consisted of nothing more than a folding table from Goodwill, an old chair I picked up off the street, which I of course cleaned thoroughly, and a small desk lamp. Every morning, I made myself a cup of coffee from a worn-out machine, and got to work as if I were running a high-end jewelry empire. I started by taking small contracts from local antique dealers. I offered lower rates than the big companies but ensured the highest quality service. Gradually, more clients came to me. I had a knack for spotting undervalued treasures. A seemingly worthless diamond ring, a vintage locket dismissed as cheap costume jewelry, but actually belonging to a 19th-century European aristocrat. Word spread. 6 months later, a turning point arrived. A private collector approached me to authenticate a family heirloom collection. I worked tirelessly for 2 weeks, analyzing every stone, every engraving. And then, I uncovered 2 extraordinarily rare pieces that had previously been misidentified as fakes. When the collection went to auction, it sold for over $900,000, earning me a 10% commission. That was $90,000. The largest sum I had ever seen in my life. I remember sitting silently in my tiny office, ink still smudged on my hands from my research notes, and breaking into tears, not because I was weak, but because, for the first time in my life, I knew I was on the right path. With that money, I rented a real office, one with functioning air conditioning, free from the lingering scent of food, and even a small showroom for clients. I hired my first employee, Jenny, a recent graduate in gemology. Jenny reminded me of my younger self, brilliant, passionate, yet underestimated because she was quiet. Within 2 years, my company was no longer just a small office. We expanded to New York, then Miami. I started working with major auction houses, wealthy collectors, and elite families looking to appraise their inherited jewelry. And the funniest part? My family had no idea. They still thought I worked at some little antique shop. Every time I came home for dinner, I played the role of ordinary Ivy, the girl with a small job at a dusty old jewelry store. "You're still at the same place?" my mother asked while setting a roasted chicken on the table. "Yeah, still the same," I replied. She nodded approvingly, as if I were still the same unremarkable child I had always been to her. Rachel rolled her eyes. "God, you should really get a real job." I smiled and said nothing. That morning I had closed a $500,000 authentication deal. But Rachel still thought I was a failure. Then one day, Aunt Claire called me, her voice filled with worry. "Ivy, your parents are in financial trouble. They might lose the house if they don't pay off their debt soon." Despite being treated like an invisible presence my entire childhood, I couldn't ignore it. That house was where I had grown up, where I had cried alone every time I was forgotten. So I decided to send $7,000 a month into their account as an anonymous contribution. I never told them it was from me. And then one night, During dinner, my mother said, "Rachel, you are such a wonderful daughter. Thanks to you, we didn't have to sell the house." I nearly dropped my glass. Rachel shrugged smugly. "Yeah, I just wanted to help." I let out a quiet laugh. She was actually taking credit for the money I had sent. And that was the moment I realized something important. No matter what I did, in their eyes, I would never matter as much as Rachel. But that no longer hurt me. Because I had built an empire they knew nothing about. Thanksgiving was the day everything fell apart. I had expected this year's Thanksgiving dinner to be unpleasant. But I hadn't expected it to be the night everything shattered in the most dramatic way possible. My mother called 2 weeks before the dinner, her voice shakier than usual. "Ivy, I don't know what to do anymore. My back hurts so much. Cooking for the whole family is too much for me." I glanced at my work schedule. I had a major auction coming up right after Thanksgiving, but I knew that if I refused, I'd once again be labeled as the ungrateful daughter. "It's okay, Mom, I'll take care of the food." I hired one of the most upscale catering services in Chicago, the same company I used for corporate events. They delivered a Michelin star-worthy feast, from truffle-stuffed turkey to homemade cranberry sauce. The cost? More than 2 months of Rachel's salary. But I didn't care. I just wanted the night to go smoothly. Of course, with my family that was impossible. The moment the food was served, Rachel sneered. "You ordered takeout? Jesus, at least make a proper stuffing." I tightened my grip around my wineglass, forcing down my anger. This was coming from someone who once managed to burn instant ramen in the microwave. My mother quickly interjected, trying to smooth over the discomfort spreading across the room. "It's a little different from past years, but come on, at least we have a meal to enjoy." I said nothing. It wasn't worth arguing. The evening dragged on in forced politeness. Rachel droned on about her challenging marketing job, which mostly consisted of fetching coffee for her boss and adjusting PowerPoint slides. My mother nodded along in admiration, as if she had just won a Nobel Prize. And me? I simply smiled, knowing that just that morning I had signed a jewelry authentication contract worth nearly $500,000. After dinner, I slipped upstairs to my old room to check on an auction in Hong Kong. A rare Art Nouveau necklace was up for bidding, and one of my VIP clients wanted confirmation on its true value before placing an offer. I opened my laptop, scrolling through financial reports and trading accounts. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice when the door swung open without a single knock. "Rachel, do you have a phone charger?" she asked, but her eyes were already locked onto my laptop screen. Before I could react, she lunged forward and snatched the laptop with a mischievous grin. "Let's see what you're up." She froze. On the screen was my bank account. A balance of over $12 million. I watched Rachel's face go pale, then immediately twist into something raw and greedy. "What the hell is this?" she stammered, eyes wide. "Whose money is this? Don't tell me you actually have this much." I sprang up, grabbing for my laptop, but it was too late. Rachel bolted downstairs, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Everyone, come look, Ivy's a millionaire." The room fell into a dead silence. Every pair of eyes turned to me. "Rachel, don't do this," I gritted my teeth. But she was already pointing at me like she had just uncovered a criminal. "She has over $12 million, while this whole family is struggling every single day." My mother dropped her fork, her face going pale before it flushed red with anger. You had that kind of money while your father and I were struggling?" Her voice shook. "While Rachel has student loan debt? While we've been scraping by to keep this house?" I stood frozen. No congratulations, no pride. Only outrage. My father stood up, his face like stone. "We raised you, you have an obligation to share with your family." Rachel, sensing the perfect opportunity, chimed in with a sweet fake pout. "I just need $2 million, she shrugged. "Not much. I just want a fresh start, a better life like you." My mother nodded in agreement. "That's right, Ivy, and your father and I have been thinking about a vacation home in Florida. Nothing too extravagant, just around $3 million. I let out a bitter laugh. So, now you all think I have a financial responsibility to this family? My father's tone turned firm. It's not a matter of thinking, daughter. It's your obligation. I set my wineglass down on the table, glancing around at the faces staring at me with hunger, like vultures circling their prey. I've been sending $7,000 a month into your account for the past 2 years, I said, my voice ice cold. I helped pay off this family's biggest debts. Silence. My mother's eyes widened. What did you just say? I laughed, but it looks like Rachel already took credit for that. Rachel froze. I saw a flicker of fear cross her face. My father clenched his fists, but I no longer cared. Slowly I stood up, grabbed my laptop, picked up my designer handbag, one my mother once assumed was a cheap knockoff, and walked straight to the door. Before leaving, I turned back and looked them in the eye. Not another cent, no more support. This family is no longer my responsibility. My mother looked shell-shocked, Rachel's mouth hung open in disbelief. I slammed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I walked away from Thanksgiving dinner with a mix of relief and bitterness. For the first time, I set a boundary. I was no longer the forgotten child in the corner, no longer a bystander in my own life. But I also knew they wouldn't let this go. And I was right. Less than an hour after leaving, my phone started buzzing non-stop. My mother, Rachel. My father, Aunt Claire's number. Even unfamiliar numbers. I guessed long-lost relatives suddenly remembered I existed. 7:42 p.m. How could you do this to your family? I raised you. 8:15 p.m. Let's be reasonable and talk like adults. Family is important. 9:30 p.m. You have all that money, why are you being so selfish? Rachel needs your help. 11 p.m. I found a perfect house in Florida. It's only $3 million. I silenced my phone. But the messages kept pouring in. The final straw was Rachel's dramatic Facebook post, as if she were starring in a low-budget soap opera. My millionaire sister hid her fortune from the family for years, letting our parents struggle, letting me drown in student debt. No one can believe this betrayal. I have always supported her. And this is how she treats her family? Hundreds of likes, floods of comments from distant relatives. Unbelievable. Ivy was always the weird one. If I had that kind of money, I'd help my family instead of abandoning them. She's so ungrateful. I let out a cold laugh. Rachel, the girl who had never lifted a finger in her life, who had never earned a single dollar on her own, was now playing the victim. I didn't block them. I knew they wouldn't stop until they saw me in person. And just as I predicted, Monday morning, they showed up at my office. Jenny, my assistant, burst into my office, looking alarmed. Ivy, your mom, dad, and Rachel are at the front desk. They say they have an appointment. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I'm guessing they don't actually have one. Jenny swallowed. Not at all, they're arguing with security. I stood up and walked into the lobby. My father sat with his legs crossed, Rachel had her arms folded in smug defiance, and my mother's eyes glistened with calculated tears. Ivy, we need to talk, my father said in a low voice. There's nothing left to say, I cut in. I've made myself very clear. Rachel scoffed. You seriously think you can just refuse to help your family? You're living in luxury while we're struggling. I crossed my arms and looked her straight in the eye. Are you struggling? Because you seem pretty comfortable with that brand new Gucci bag. My mother immediately burst into tears. Ivy, you owe this family. We raised you. We sacrificed so much for you. Are you really going to abandon us? I looked at them, completely emotionless. I don't owe anyone anything. I built everything on my own. When I needed help, where were you? Nowhere. Rachel clenched her fists, her voice rising in anger. You're heartless. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and performed the simplest action of my life. I canceled every automatic payment I had been sending them. Right in front of their eyes. My mother shrieked as her phone dinged with the notification. You can't do this. I just did. My father's face turned red, his voice sharp with fury. You'll regret this, we're family. I nodded at security. Escort them out, and put their names on the do not enter list for this building. Rachel screamed, my mother collapsed into sobs, but I didn't care anymore. They were thrown out of my company, right in front of my employees and clients. And I felt absolutely no guilt. That night, I got a call. Grandma Amelia. Well done, Ivy. Her voice was filled with pride. I stayed silent. You're not mad at me? She chuckled. You're the first one in this family to stand on your own. I just wish I could have seen their faces when they got kicked out of your office. I laughed, for the first time in days, a real smile. Thank you, Grandma. You don't need to thank me, Ivy, you did the right thing. I gazed out the window of my high-rise apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I had cut them off. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The moment my office door slammed shut behind my family, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Not fear, not regret. Relief. I had severed the ties completely. No more pointless financial support, no more manipulative messages or desperate midnight calls. For the first time, I no longer had to carry the weight of people who didn't deserve it. But I also knew they wouldn't give up easily. Within a week I moved. My old apartment was too easy to find. I rented a penthouse in the most secure part of Chicago, with 24/7 security, and a strict guest registry. I changed my phone number, updated my company information, wiped all personal data from social media. My family had no way to contact me. Yet they still tried. My mother sent emails from a new address every single day, filled with manipulative subject lines. I'm very sick, do you really not care? Family is still family, Ivy, don't do this. You'll regret it if you let me die without saying goodbye. Rachel, on the other hand, took a different approach. She went public. On Facebook she wrote long-winded posts about her greedy millionaire sister abandoning her family in their time of need, inviting nosy relatives to swarm the comments. I can't believe Ivy could be this heartless. That girl was always strange, not surprising. Having money but refusing to help family? That's just awful. I just smirked. These people never cared about me when I had nothing, and now, suddenly, they had opinions? I didn't respond. Not a single reply, not a single explanation. The more furious they became, the quieter I stayed. And that drove them insane. Whether I liked it or not, the Thanksgiving incident spread further than I expected. One of my high-profile clients overheard the story at a party, and within days, the high-end jewelry business community started recognizing my name in a new way. The woman abandoned by her family for being too successful? The story gained traction, but instead of damaging my reputation, it made me a trusted name in jewelry authentication. Collectors flooded to my company, not just for my expertise, but because they admired how I defended my achievements. I expanded, opening 2 new offices, one in Los Angeles and one in Miami. Within a year, my company surpassed every competitor, becoming the leading name in luxury jewelry authentication. Meanwhile, Rachel was also trying to build her own career. One day, Jenny, my assistant, walked into my office, eyes wide as if she had just seen something unbelievable. Ivy, you're not going to believe this. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? Jenny placed an article in front of me about a new jewelry authentication business. The name? Rachel's Fine Jewels Authentication. I burst into laughter. Rachel, the person who couldn't tell cubic zirconia from a real diamond, was trying to open a jewelry authentication company? I clicked on her website. Less than 3 months after launching, Rachel's company was flooded with terrible reviews. They mislabeled my Cartier bracelet as a fake. Terrible service, the staff has no knowledge. This company is a complete joke. I wasn't surprised. Rachel had never taken anything seriously in her life, and this was no different. She thought that just by having the same last name as me, she could waltz into the luxury jewelry world? No, this industry wasn't for frauds. Even though everything was crystal clear, my family still wouldn't give up. Despite publicly claiming they didn't need me, that I didn't matter, I still heard rumors that they were desperately hoping I'd come back. Aunt Claire accidentally texted me. Your mom says they don't need your money, but honestly they're struggling. It wouldn't hurt if you helped. Of course. They didn't need my money. Until they were broke. Rachel was drowning in debt, my mother was clinging to appearances, and my father was scrambling to stay afloat. And I no longer cared. A year after cutting them off completely, I sat on my penthouse balcony, a glass of wine in hand, gazing at the dazzling Chicago skyline. I no longer feared my phone ringing. I no longer checked my email, dreading another money request. I no longer felt pressured to prove anything. I had won. But not in the way they thought. My real victory was freedom. Not the millions in my bank account. Not owning the most successful company in my industry. But the fact that no one could control me anymore. I was free in a way my family would never understand. And I never looked back. The lesson from Ivy's story isn't just about financial success, but more importantly, about reclaiming oneself. She refused to let her family's expectations and manipulations dictate her life. She set boundaries and protected her achievements. Sometimes, family isn't a source of support, it's a burden that needs to be left behind. True success isn't just about money, it's about the freedom to live life on your own terms, without being controlled by anyone. Ivy proved that sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away, without looking back. What do you think about Ivy's story? Did she make the right choice by cutting off her family to protect herself? Or was there another way to handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more real, emotional stories about family and life.